When we talk about what it takes to win an NBA championship, well, it takes a lot of things. Of course, you need your Superman, your 1A. In recent memory, that's guys like Jokic, Curry, Giannis, and LeBron back in the bubble. But those guys couldn't do it alone, so they needed some help, and that's where those Batman and Robins come into play, aka the X Factors. Today, I want to talk about the 20 or so teams in the NBA and their playoff X Factor that can take them over the top. Starting off here with the Denver Nuggets, and it's Michael Porter Jr. Now, again, I'm going to be going through the top 10 or so teams in each conference. So if your team fits the bill, stay tuned for that and let me know what you think. But Michael Porter Jr., when this guy drops 25 plus points, his team is 11 and 2. Of course, this guy is an amazing shooter, 6'10", and can shoot over everybody, probably aside from Victor Wembanyama. But Michael Porter is just such a special player, and with Jamal Murray's injury concerns this year, this is the guy that's going to need to step up because this team lost depth. Of course, veteran depth as well. Guys like Jeff Green and Bruce Brown left. And those were arguably the X factors last year. So this year, I don't know if it can be a KCP or a role player like that. I think it has to be Michael Porter just stepping up and probably being the second best player on this team in this postseason run, especially with guys like Jamal Murray being banged up for probably this entire postseason run. But I will say, other guys you can make an argument for. Of course, Aaron Gordon's a good one. If you want to say his offensive ability, if he can take a step up, excuse me. Or guys like Reggie Jackson, guys that have been playing great. Shout out to Reggie Jackson, by the way. He goes under the radar, but he's been playing really good basketball. Guys like that, I can understand if you want to go with a guy like Christian Braun. Again, there's a couple options, but I'm going to go with Michael Porter simply stepping up and being that second scorer, just like Jamal Murray was last year, to take this team over the top. For the Oklahoma City Thunder, I'm going to go with Lou Dort plus team rebounding, and I'll get into team rebounding here in a moment. But for Lou Dort, this is a guy that does shoot 40% from the three-point line. But again, that's kind of why you can't look at the stat sheet and hopefully and think that it tells you everything. This is a guy that gets the Ben Simmons treatment on a nightly basis. He does shoot 40% from three, but again, it's like on 4 to 5 attempts a game and he's wide open. So to me, if this guy can reliably shoot 40% from three, whether if he's left open or not, that's going to be huge for this team because eventually, if you knock down the majority of them, teams are going to have to step out. And when they step out, that gives more room for guys like Shea and Chet and, of course, J-Dub to create and just make plays to the ability that they can. And it just opens up the floor for a lot of them. But for the team rebounding aspect, I worry about this team for the simple fact that if they match up with a team like the Sacramento Kings in the first round and they go up against a guy like Domantas Sabonis, I'm worried about him, man. I think that could be a potential upset in the first round just with how dominant Sabonis can be and aggressive he can be on the boards. Of course, the Thunder haven't been the greatest rebounding team all year, and I think in a slowed down 7 game series, or a series after series rather, especially when you're tired, rebounding is so important, especially in the postseason, whether offensively or defensively. And I worry about it if this team collectively doesn't go get it done together, because of course they didn't get it big at the deadline. For the Minnesota Timberwolves, I'm going to say Karl-Anthony Towns return. Like, what version of him are we going to get when he returns? Is he going to be the all-star level player, or is he going to take a series or two, or maybe he just never gets back to the level he was playing at earlier in the season? Of course, for a guy of Karl-Anthony Towns' play style, I think he should be fine. I think it might take him a couple games, but with about a week or so left in the season, we see guys like Joel Embiid returning. This is a perfect time for Cat to return, whether if he comes off the bench or if he's just limited minutes to get his feet back under him and be that X factor for this team in the playoffs. Because you know Ant is going to be the incredible playoff performer that he's been in his career. You know Rudy Gobert is going to be playing at a Defensive Player of the Year level, and hopefully this year he doesn't get taken off the court like he has in playoff series past. You could argue guys like Jaden Daniels. I love Jaden Daniels as the player. Mike Conley, of course. But to me, I think they have the defense to compete with anybody in the postseason. But Anthony Edwards is going to be dealing with a lot of double teams, and he's going to have a lot of offensive attention on him, or defensive attention rather, when they're on offense. They need that second guy, and that second guy to take them over the top is Karl-Anthony Towns, in my opinion. But again, you see it in the back there. Just consistent offense in general, right? If it's not Karl-Anthony Towns, you need Jaden McDaniels to step up rather. You need Mike Conley to step up. You need some of these other guys to take the load off of these top guys, and that could take them really far in the postseason. But we know they have the defense, and to me, Karl-Anthony Towns could be that extra offensive punch to take them over the top. So he's their X factor as far as winning a Larry O'Brien. For the Los Angeles Clippers, you can make a 4 or 5 different arguments here. You could say Russell Westbrook's energy off the bench, just him coming off playing a great efficient basketball. That could be one. You could say Paul George playing at the level in the postseason that we saw him play without Kawhi Leonard, and basically at the level where he was when he took this team to the Western Conference Finals against the Phoenix Suns in 2021. We need that Paul George here in this postseason, and if we don't get it, Paul George has a history of disappearing in the playoffs, and we just don't want to see that here in 2024 now that we finally get their top 2 guys healthy for the postseason run at the same time. First time since the bubble, right? You could make the argument that Kawhi just needs to step up and be the guy. You can make an argument for the health. I say all of this to say that I think I want to settle on the fact that James Harden is the X factor for me, for the simple fact that, no, I don't need him to be MVP James Harden that drops a triple-double a night and he's giving you 20 and 10. No, I don't need that, right? But I need a James Harden that's locked in defensively, that's going to give you a defensive effort, right? And he's also going to be playmaking at a high level. So the playmaking we know just comes with James Harden, right? But I need a guy that's going to be efficient in this postseason run, a guy that's not going to shoot 4 of 13 from the field. I need a guy that's going to be shooting, 4 of 8, right? 4 of 7, and make his shots count, make his impact felt, and just be the most efficient player on the court, whether that's passing the ball or trying to score the ball, also with some defensive efforts. So I think, of course, you have Kawhi Leonard, you have Paul George. Those are guys that simply can win you series. But if you want to win it, easily, I think James Harden comes into play and he can be the X factor, quote unquote, to take them from, maybe just winning 1 or 2 playoff series to winning the entire NBA Finals. So I think James Harden, just with being efficient and showing some effort on the defensive side of the ball more so than he has, and I think that could be the X factor for him going into the postseason. For the New Orleans Pelicans, I'm going to say, well, Zion, of course, he's their best player. But let me explain. I have him as the X factor because of his inexperience. He hasn't played in a play-in. He hasn't played in a playoff series. And we know some players either rise to the occasion or kind of shrink. I just mentioned it there with James Harden. He used to win. He used to win MVPs and be in the conversation each and every year for a good 5 to 6 year stretch. But when he got to the postseason, he has nothing to show for it except for maybe 1 or 2 playoff series wins and going toe-to-toe with the Warriors, right? He never won the NBA Finals. So for Zion, we know you're the best player. We know you're dominant. But how are you going to perform when it comes to the playoffs when it's a slow down 7-game series? I'm interested to see how Zion either steps up or steps aside. But outside of Zion, and of course, also I didn't mention, Brandon Ingram is dealing with an injury. So Zion, even more reason he should be stepping up in the postseason. But for a guy like Trey Murphy, when we talk about actual role players on this team, this is a guy that he can legitimately average 20 a night for this team in the postseason, because we know with no Brandon Ingram, we don't know when he's going to come back, right? We know CJ McCollum's going to get a lot of the perimeter attention, and on the interior, Zion's going to get pretty much all of it. So if Zion gets hot in some of these games and the games get close, he's going to need that perimeter shooting to bail him out and to get this team over the top in these games. And that's where Trey Murphy comes into play. This is a 6'8", 6'10" forward that can shoot from 40 feet and consistently at that. So Trey Murphy, we know the defense will be there from Trey Murphy. We just need that shooting to be consistently there, because if they're missing Brandon Ingram, Zion's going to be able to keep it close, but he's going to need that extra X factor, that extra punch to take this team over the top. And that's where, of course, CJ McCollum and Jonas Valanciunas. But of course, the biggest one to me is Trey Murphy to take them over the top. So Trey Murphy is the true X factor for the New Orleans Pelicans. For the Dallas Mavericks, I'm going to say it's Tim Hardaway Jr. Again, you have Kyrie, you have Luka, 2 big-time playoff performers. And now you have you need that third scorer, right? Of course, you have the 2 dominant scorers in Kyrie and Luka that can do it pretty much at will. but eventually, it's a lot on the body to score each and every position, to create each and every possession for guys like Luka and Kyrie, especially when we talk about going as far as winning a championship. So you need that extra punch. You need that guy that can take the load off of these two. And we know Tim Hardaway is inconsistent as can be, but I think, if he can show up here 2 to 3 times a series and give him that 20 to 25 points, either off the bench or in the starting lineup, that could be all that the Mavericks need to get this team to where they want to go, and that is an NBA Finals. Tim Hardaway, to me, I think is the X factor because he can take the load and the pressure off of their top two guys and give them a break here every once in a while. But also outside of him, I want to say the big play, of course, Derek Lively, Daniel Gafford have been amazing this season. But we want them to stay out of foul trouble, and we want to see them rebounding the ball at a high level. If they can do that, which that's basically what they already do, this team can be great. But again, of course, playoff level, different atmosphere. Of course, as a Cavs fan, I know as of last year, it's a completely different atmosphere when, of course, your bigs that you think could dominate don't. So we want to see Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford show up to play. But the biggest X factor for me is Tim Hardaway Jr. For the Sacramento Kings, it is Malik Monk. Obvious reason, Sixth Man of the Year candidate. De'Aaron Fox has taken a step back offensively this year compared to last, but of course, De'Aaron Fox is still De'Aaron Fox. He's going to show up. They still have Domantas Sabonis, who's going to get more attention now than ever because it seems like he's playing. I'm going to say it. Domantas Sabonis is playing at an MVP level, and I'm going to talk about that next week here because quick shameless plug. We're going to be doing NBA awards next Tuesday. So if you're interested, of course, drop a like, subscribe, and tune in next week. But for the Kings here, Malik Monk, I think, is a guy that's, usually he's consistent. He's been more consistent than he has in previous years. And of course, the one game that he, really just kind of fell off the cliff, it's my fault. I bet on him. I bet on him to have more than 16 points, and he put up 0 on like 0 of 12 shooting. We just can't have that Malik Monk. As long as we get the normal 16 to 22 points a night, Malik Monk, I think this team's going to be in a very good place to compete on a slow down 7-game series. Of course, you can make an argument for some of these role players to step up. But again, if you have 3 guys really putting up 20 plus a night, it's going to be hard to beat. When you have De'Aaron Fox, Malik Monk, and Sabonis dominating the way that they could, I think this team could be great, in the postseason, especially when it comes to maybe pulling off an upset against teams like the Minnesota Timberwolves or the Oklahoma City Thunder. So that is my X factor. You could also make an argument for guys like Keon Ellis and Keegan Murray, just knocking down the 3 consistently. Great arguments, but I'm going to settle on Malik Monk. For the Phoenix Suns, I'm going to say team rebounding. Of course, they don't have that legitimate big man. So it's the same argument as the Oklahoma City Thunder. In a 7-game series, it's huge. So if they don't have their team rebounding, of course, those extra possessions could be what costs them in the long run. But outside of that, I'm going to say really just their shooters. And for the same reasons I've mentioned with guys like Malik Monk, Keegan Murray, and Trey Murphy prior to this. But Grayson Allen, Eric Gordon are 2 guys that are just going to space the floor for guys like Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and Bradley Beal. And simply put, if they can knock down a 3 at a high level, there's no stopping this team because you already have to pretty much double team Devin Booker and Kevin Durant. And if you can't double team them because you got to occupy these shooters, you're going to have a very tough time winning these series. You better be putting up 150 points to take down the Phoenix Suns. But as we saw with this team against the Denver Nuggets, once these guys started knocking down these outside shots, they couldn't double team Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and Bradley Beal. And that's where it was dangerous because you couldn't guard those top 3 guys in one-on-one situations. So it really is an unfair situation for other teams if Grayson Allen and Eric Gordon, guys like that, can knock down the outside shot. So I'm going to say team rebounding and really Grayson Allen here in this situation. For the LA Lakers, I'm going to say Darvin Ham. I'm going to say Darvin Ham because, there's been a lot of questions about him, especially in the postseason of last year. I will say, actually, last year, he did adjust a fair amount in the postseason, and it was a big part of why they went so far. But in the regular season, it seems like this guy just doesn't want to make adjustments. He doesn't want to call timeouts. Hopefully, in the postseason, we get last year's Darvin Ham, is a good way to put it. And then from a player perspective, I could have said Austin Reeves. very, very good argument for a guy like Austin Reeves. But I think a guy in D'Angelo Russell that, again, provides that three-point shooting. This year, he's been shooting at a career level. I haven't checked these statistics, but this is the best I've seen D'Angelo Russell shoot from the three-point line. Of course, he just passed a LA Lakers record for most three-pointers in a season. Shout out to D'Lo, right? But I just think if he can be that third guy for them, sometimes their second guy behind Anthony Davis in this postseason run, save the legs of LeBron James for when you really, really need it. I think that can be huge. And a guy like D'Lo or Austin Reeves being that second guy next to AD would be huge for them in the long run. But you can also make the argument that say, hey, we need playoff Anthony Davis. We need aggressive Anthony Davis game in and game out. And that simply alone can take us over the top. So it really just depends on what team they're facing, I guess. For the Golden State Warriors, it's Klay Thompson. You know, Curry's going to show up. At this point, you don't know if Draymond's going to play the entire game or not. And for that reason, we've seen it a couple times this year where Klay Thompson, whether if he's starting or coming off the bench, when he gives his team that extra punch, this team is unstoppable. They're blowing teams out. I need to check the statistics, but it seems like when Klay drops 18 plus, this team is blowing out the other team. So we need that Klay Thompson. If he can give us 18 to 20 a night, the Warriors are going to be a very hard out here, whether in the play-in or in a 7-game series. So championship, put them foes up. Klay Thompson, I love that X factor for the Golden State Warriors. But then we talk about a team that's been on the rise. You could say Jalen Green for the simple fact that he's been dropping 25 to 30 a night, seems like, on this 10-11 game win streak. You could make an argument for Dillon Brooks, of course, with his defensive intensity, and he's going to have to guard a lot of these top guys here in the play-in. But I'm just going to say Fred VanVleet. Of course, Jalen Green is amazing offensively, but you need that second guy, that extra offensive punch. And we saw Fred VanVleet when he could step up in that 2019 finals, especially in that in that postseason run. I just think it was huge for that team. And of course, every little bit helps to take the pressure off of guys like Lowry and of course Kawhi Leonard, especially in that 2019 finals. So we need either Fred VanVleet to have another kid so he plays at that level again, or we just need him to step up here in the postseason run. Regardless, I think Fred VanVleet to get them into the playoffs should be their X factor. For the Boston Celtics, it's going to be Kristaps Porzingis. I sound like a broken record, but it's for the spacing aspect, right? Playoff series are not usually as run and gun. They're not as, shoot a million threes as possible, unless you're the 2018 Rockets. In the playoffs, teams tend to take the safer shot. They tend to take, the closer shots to the basket if possible, right? And I think having that extra spacing for your star players like Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, even a guy like Jrue Holiday who likes to attack the basket is huge, right? And when you're a 7'1" big man that could shoot 40 to 42% from three on a lot of volume, that's huge for these star players on your team. And again, it takes the pressure off. It's these X factors that can really take this team over the top. And not to mention, Kristaps is amazing defensively. So if he can, block some shots here and knock down a couple threes, really just be who Kristaps has been all season, I think it's huge. But especially if we get that first month Kristaps here that we got for the Boston Celtics, this team is going to be unstoppable in the postseason as far as a 7-game series. For the Milwaukee Bucks, currently, they've been rising up the ranks despite having a terrible record with Doc Rivers. They're the number 2 seed in the Eastern Conference. And from a coaching perspective, I'm going to say Doc Rivers. Again, a guy that doesn't have a good track record at all in the postseason. He won 1 championship, right, with the 2008 Boston Celtics. Outside of that, he has the most 3-1 series blown in NBA history as a head coach. And in the last couple of years, he's just been bouncing around from team to team, it really seems like, of course, over the last couple of years. However, Doc Rivers, we know, is a veteran head coach. He's been there. This is a guy that could, really just use his veteranship to take this team over the top. However, I want to see it done, right? And I will say that this time is probably the most talented team he's had since those Boston Celtics days. You can make an argument maybe for the Clippers teams, but they were never healthy postseason time, so cut them some slack there. However, Doc Rivers, We know he is a coach that can make adjustments, but now you have the talent to do it. You know, as long as you make the adjustments, there's no excuse as to why you can't take this team over the top for a team like Boston and Denver to win a championship here yet again in your career. You have maybe the best player in the world, and you have a top 2 point guard in the world. You have the role players as well. And speaking of, one of those role players is Chris Middleton, a guy that as of late has come back, and he just had his first career triple double or second career, excuse me. So shout out to Chris Middleton, right? But again, we know in their last championship run in 2021, Chris Middleton was that X factor. He was the guy to take them over the top. Well, you can make an argument for Bobby Portis as well. But I think Chris Middleton being that third guy here in this offense, if he can give you 15 to 20 points a night, just knocking down the outside shot and playing good defense, it's going to make this team very hard to beat in a 7 game series. Hypothetically, right? If he can hold a guy like Jaylen Brown or Jason Tatum under 30, and he can also give you 20 points, that is huge for in a 7 game series and in must-win games, especially when you have Giannis and Dame bringing it every night on the offensive end. So Chris Middleton again needs to be that X factor to take them over the top. For the New York Knicks, I'm going to say Julius Randle's health. Well, I'm going to say health in general because OG Anunoby and Julius Randle have been dealing with some injuries. So I'm going to say health in general, right? And of course, this is a team that's super deep. That we need them to, if they can have that depth in the playoffs, that's dangerous. But I'm going to say health in general for some of these guys. But also, if we want to talk about the actual player perspectives, of course, Julius Randle, he doesn't have the greatest playoff history. So if he can step up and be consistent, even when he returns, that's going to be a huge addition for a guy like Jalen Brunson. Takes the pressure off of him so he doesn't have to drop 60 against the Spurs, right? But also OG Anunoby, I think a guy that his offensive ability has gone under the radar. We know his defense is there, but this team has enough defenders to keep them in series. I mean, this is the best probably defense in basketball outside of the Timberwolves. So if they, we know the defense is going to be there, but if we can get the extra offensive punches from Dante DiVincenzo, from OG Anunoby, from Julius Randle, if he could be consistent, I think that's huge for them. And of course, we know the defense is there. We need that extra offensive punch. So if one of these guys can step up and be consistent and efficient, of course, that's huge for the Knicks in the 7 game series. For the Cleveland Cavaliers, the X factor is hopefully we have our the lights aren't too bright this time around. That is the real X factor. But JB Bickerstaff, I'm not the biggest fan of JB Bickerstaff as a Cavs fan. He doesn't make adjustments, and this is a guy that's just very stubborn with his rotation. And sometimes a lot of things he does just doesn't make sense as a Cavs fan, right? But then the other thing is Evan Mobley, right? We know Jarrett Allen, if he's going to shrink or not, that doesn't matter. This is where you need to step up. You need to play like you did 2 years ago, Evan Mobley, right? Going into the postseason last year. You need to play like that, not how you did in the postseason, but before that. Evan Mobley is the X factor here because we know what the potential is with him. We know he can be such a special player, but we need him to start getting back to showing us flashes of that. And he hasn't really all season. He's kind of just settled in this, okay, I'm going to take a jump hook here and there, and I'm going to play, I'm going to block some shots. But he has more potential than that. Evan Mobley should be arguably our best player on the court. At this point in his career, he should be fighting with Donovan Mitchell, but he's not. And of course, some injuries have been in his way, but I think Evan Mobley just needs to take that extra step, getting back on the right progression of being a legitimate superstar in the league. And I think that could be huge for us in the postseason. But again, when you face teams like the Boston Celtics, like the New York Knicks or the Milwaukee Bucks, you need that big man to really dominate. And I think that could be huge for us. Take the pressure off of guys like Donovan Mitchell and the inconsistency of Darius Garland, which we get every day. So I'm not even going to call it inconsistent anymore. Darius Garland is just what he is at this point. For the Orlando Magic, besides having the best theme song in the NBA, I'm going to say team 3-point shooting because I think as a team, they're the worst 3-point shooting team in the league. I think they only shoot like 30% as a team from three. So, of course, having that 3-point shooting takes the pressure off of your star players, especially because they like to attack the rim. Guys like Franz Wagner and, of course, P5, right? But outside of that, I think Jonathan Isaac, a guy that's just plays at 130%. He plays at Russ percent because this is a guy that just goes 110 miles an hour when he's out on the court, but he's impactful when he does it. Of course, it's a guy that hasn't played basketball really since the bubble, but the last couple months he's been ramping up and he's been that defensive monster that he's always been. However, he's only going to be giving you those short spurts because he just plays so dang hard on the court. So if he can give you those 10, if he can give you like 10 to 15 minutes of just hard basketball each and every game, I think that's going to be huge for this team defensively because if they can't shoot the three, they're going to need that defense to be there to keep them in these games. So Jonathan Isaac is the X factor for the Magic. For the Pacers, it is the return of Tyrese Halliburton, right? We need him to play like he did early in the season because at one point, believe it or not, this team was the greatest offensive team of all time, according to some statistics. But that has definitely come back down to earth. They traded Buddy Hield, who was not being used nearly how he was in Indiana, to Philly. But we'll get into that in a minute. But the Pacers, they traded for Pascal. We know there was going to be an adjustment period, and really Tyrese just hasn't been himself. He hasn't been that MVP level player that we saw really before the play-in tourney. Ever since that point with some injuries, and he's been playing through them, he just hasn't been the same player. But we need him to return to that level beginning of the year where they were a top 3 seed in the East. And if he can, of course, with this team having the 2 all-star level guys in Pascal and Tyrese, with Miles Turner, with Ben Mathurin, right? You have some other supporting pieces. I think this team could be a sneaky first or second round team, but Tyrese needs to return to form before we can talk about anything further than a first or second round team. For the Miami Heat, you could point out, and honestly, it's Haywood Highsmith because knowing the Heat, Haywood Highsmith is going to come into the postseason and average 15 points. Honestly, though, I mean, guys like Duncan Robinson, I think we saw, last year he was unplayable in the playoffs because he didn't play defense. And, if he wasn't knocking down the three, he was really just he was a negative for the team, right? He was getting attacked on defense each and every possession, as Chris Smoove would say, playing whoever offense on a guy like Duncan Robinson. But also, again, defensively wasn't there, and offensively, if he missed his first couple threes, it's like, why is he on the court? But this year, we've seen a more locked-in defensive version of Duncan Robinson. So if we can get that with his three-point shooting, of course, that's dangerous, like we saw in their bubble finals run a few years back. But if not Duncan Robinson, I think it is Terry Rozier, for the simple fact that when he came over to this team, this guy's just kind of, yes, he's bought into the Heat culture, but I think he's playing for, for the team is a good way to put it. He's playing like he's a Miami Heat player, and he's not playing like the player that they traded for and they needed, that 15 to 17 point score. So if that makes sense, I think he needs to revert back to his Charlotte days where he's more aggressive offensively. He's not trying to play make as much, and he's going to be that extra offensive punch next to Bam and Jimmy Butler and Tyler Hero as well. Give him that extra, 12 to 20 points a night on a range and be that old school Terry Rozier that we've known that can go out there and occasionally 1 out of every 10 games win you the game. So Terry Rozier, I think could be a huge offensive punch. But again, it's the Miami Heat. Jaime Jaquez and Nikola Jovic are about to come out and average 15 to 20 points a night for them in this postseason run. For the Philadelphia 76ers, we got word yesterday that Joel Embiid is returning this Thursday against the Oklahoma City Thunder. I'm not sure that's the best matchup for him to return, but it is Joel Embiid. This was the runaway MVP before he got hurt for back-to-back years, but he got hurt. He's not going to qualify this year, and this is a guy that is going to return, and the entire postseason lives, I know it's a cliche answer, but it relies on Joel Embiid. When he was playing how he was early in the year, this team was dominant. I know for obvious reasons because he opened up the floor for everybody else around him. But I'm excited to see what a guy like Buddy Hield could do. If not Joel Embiid, my X factor is Buddy Hield with Joel Embiid back. Because again, he's a shooter, and we saw the last time Joel Embiid had a shooter like Buddy Hield, a guy like JJ Redick. He was dominant, JJ Redick was. So I'm excited to see what he can do with a guy like Buddy Hield. And of course, Tyrese Maxey has been amazing all season. Most improved player on the year. For the teams like the Bulls and the Hawks, teams that most likely won't make it out the play-in, but if they do, of course, they'll be first-round exits most likely. For the Hawks, it is Trae Young's return, but if Trae Young is not going to be ready for playoff basketball, I'm going to say that, let's go Jalen Johnson. Of course, we know DeJounte Murray has been on an absolute tear. So honestly, he could just be their X factor because if he plays at this level, this team is going to make the postseason. Getting 44 points on 44 shots is crazy though. For the Bulls, though, I think they have a better shot of making the playoffs. Maybe if they can match up with the Sixers and Joel Embiid's just not the same player, or if he has to, take more time out for injury than we originally thought. I think the Bulls can maybe in a one-game scenario get the advantage of them with DeMar DeRozan, getting him into the postseason. But I think if let's say they make the postseason in this scenario, I think Ayu Dosunmu is going to be that X factor for them in his 7-game series. But of course, let me know. There's a couple different options you can go with. You could just say, hey, we need Kobe White to play at the level he's been playing at, of course. But he's been very consistent this year. So I want to say that's going to continue. We need Vucevic to play a little bit more aggressively. But, a couple different things you can go with. But I'm going to say Ayu Dosunmu, giving these star players that extra punch off the bench. And that can really take them over the top. But here's a quick recap on the screen. Of course, left side, you have your Western Conference. Right side, you have your East. Pretty self-explanatory. But that's going to do it here for today's show. Of course, on this Thursday, we're going to be going through a 2-round mock draft. I might actually be recording that just right after this. So if I'm wearing the same clothes, that's why. But this Thursday, a video is going to be releasing of a 2-round mock draft here on the channel. So if you enjoy that, of course, come back on Thursday. But, if you enjoyed today's video, drop a like, subscribe to the channel, and let me know what you think. If your team's in the playoffs, who do you think is the X factor? Or, hey, maybe I have the wrong definition of an X factor. What is your definition of an X factor? Of course, I want to hear from you in the comments. I'll respond to you guys as quickly as I possibly can. But if you made it this far, thank you. And thank you guys for 16,000 subscribers. But I'll see you Thursday.